Corp Ego Contempt Ryōshū is probably one of my favorite Ryōshū IDs in the game. Also, before this video begins, I want to clarify I will not be covering the skill 4, because that is dependent on a different ID. It's cool as fuck, but I've already covered it in good ID design. Also, another thing I want to say is people have been lately commenting under my IDs for Dummies videos saying, did this ID really need coverage? And to that I raise, when you started this game, did you know everything about every ID? There is a lot of resources online, yes, for understanding IDs. I understand that. But at the same time, they're also not fucking good because they're just straight up numbers and not like what shit does. Some people don't want to read all that and just want to understand the ID quickly. I'm making this series as that. I'm trying to help newer players. I'm not trying to fucking like just dump a bunch of information and numbers on them and just like leave them to rot. I think that's pretty understandable. So shut up, stop being such a fucking elitist and grow up. Anyways, Corp Ego Contempt Ryōshū. Corp Ego Contempt Ryōshū is both a DPS and a pseudo tank, and I think she really shines both in Tremor teams and Bleed teams. First, before anything else, let's talk about the passive. Grasp that forbids falling. When staggered, gain 4 protection and gain Contempt of the Gaze next turn, you gain 70% less damage taken and 70% less damage dealt. One of the skill's unit slots gain plus 20 aggro. So you will get more damage targeting you, however you'll get way less damage dealt to you. And though it says once per encounter, this is for when you're staggered. Gaining Contempt of the Gaze isn't that hard, and I'll show you why. And this is just about Felbo you saying, giving her the skill 4. Alright, now the passive, which is 2 Lust Res. On hit against enemies, inflict 2 Gaze once per turn per enemy. If this unit has Gaze of the Contempt, which is, I think given from the Ego? Yes, it is. This unit has Gaze of the Contempt, inflict plus 1 more Gaze. So it's not that vital, but it is very nice to have. When hit by an enemy, inflict 1 Gaze against the attacker once per skill 3 times per turn. If this unit has Contempt of the Gaze, when hit by the attacker's final coin, inflict 20% of the damage dealt by that final coin slot damage, max 20 per skill, max 60 per turn. So you kind of have Thorns, which is kind of cool. If this enemy used its base attack skills to consume Gaze or Contempt on an enemy, next turn gain enemy's Gaze consumed plus enemy's Contempt consumed times 3. Gaze of the Contempt, 6 per turn rounded down. So she can gain Gaze of the Contempt from enemies. She doesn't have to just use her Vav Ego. So while the synergy is good, it's not required. And her passive is just, if the ally of the earliest deployment order hits an enemy with its attack, inflict 1 bleed once per turn per enemy. If the target has bleed, inflict plus 1 bleed count as well. So it's actually pretty good support. So if you don't want to use her on your main team in bleed, which is understandable because of Tremor Hemorrhage, this is actually pretty good. This is pretty good bleed count support. Just a little bit of a nudge. Alright, her skills inflict Tremor count and bleed count because this is a hybrid Tremor bleed ID for Tremor Hemorrhage. And she gets Clash Power from Gaze or Contempt on a target, and she gets Coin Power for bleed or Tremor on a target. And she can Tremor Burst. Alright, so on Contempt, let's talk about this. Because these rolls are like okay, and they inflict good Gaze, I'd say. If this target has Gaze, this skill inflicts plus 2 more bleed and Tremor potency. Very nice. That's 7 plus sum of Gaze on all enemies, or plus 1 sum of Contempt on all enemies. Activate Cascading Gaze of Awe underneath Contempt instead, which is her skill 3-2. On use, Coin Power plus 1 for every 8 bleed plus Tremor on target, max of 2. So the coins deal Tremor bleed count, and she inflicts Tremor Hemorrhage. Now, Tremor Hemorrhage is basically Tremor Scorch, where it takes the sum of Tremor potency and bleed potency divided by 2 into lust damage. Basically, up to 99 damage per burst with Tremor Hemorrhage. However, it is kind of bad because it lowers bleed count, and bleed count isn't as easy to sustain as something like burn count or Tremor Scorch, for example. However, that comes with a caveat, because her skill 3-2 actually maintains it so well. External effects cannot trigger this skill to be reused. So no, in Mirror Dungeon, no rusty commemorative coin, basically. Prioritize targeting enemies with gaze or contempt as sub-target. It deals minus 50% damage against sub-targets, which is, whatever. If there is just a single target, deal plus 200% damage. Now this fucking shreds. It's good. Coin power plus 1 for every 4 bleed plus tremor on the main target, max 4. That is insane. That basically turns a 28 rolling into a 32 rolling. Deal plus 2% damage for every bleed and tremor on the main target, max of 100%. That's good. Deal plus 10 damage for every 1 summons on all attack targets, max 70%. Attack consumes gaze or contempt on all targets that were hit. Basically just like take their gaze or contempt. If target has contempt, deal plus 235% damage. Inflict 4 tremor and plus 2 tremor count, inflict 4 bleed and plus 2 bleed count, and then it just reduces target's tremor count by 1 when inflicting tremor hemorrhage. So this actually allows some upkeep for tremor hemorrhage, which I like a lot. Where her pseudo tankiness comes into play is her block to grass. Besides how Contempt of the Gaze interacts, Gaze of Contempt interacts with her, making her deal more damage overall. It flip-flops her role a little, because if this unit does not have Gaze of Contempt, and at 7 plus sum of Gaze on all enemies, or plus 1 plus sum of Contempt on all enemies, gain Contempt of the Gaze once per turn. If this unit has Contempt of the Gaze, final power plus 10. That is a lot of blocking power. When hit while using this skill, inflict plus 1 bleed count against the attacker 3 times per turn. That's really good. She has basically neutral bleed count sustainability when she blocks. That is actually pretty damn good. You might actually not think of her as a tank overall, just due to her 212 health value. However, she basically negates that by not taking as much damage. Anyways, let me show you her in an actual combat scenario. Here begins Fate's episode. So already some Listras. So she's gonna inflict 3 gaze already, which is very nice. See how there's already 3 gaze on the target? That's due to her passive, which is very good. Alright, on the field there's already, count them up, 3 units with gaze. So that will be 3 plus 36, that's 9, so that's over the 7 needed to turn this into skill 3-2. While we do that, we can also apply more gaze, so we can have a little bit of upkeep afterwards. Alright, so here we go. Big AoE incoming. The damage value is insane for that, by the way. So, there's already 5-5, so there's already more than enough for, gaze already, and I like that a lot. Alright, that unit will now have, Gaze of Contempt, or just Contempt. Take and deal minus 50% damage from and against Ryōshū. Targets with Contempt cannot gain Gaze. On depth, transfers this to this unit's ally for focus encounters different card, either without or with the least Contempt of the Gaze. It's really easy to understand. Alright, let me just do some counters. Very nice. Yeah, so you can see for a basic encounter, she's very easy to utilize. Oh, you can actually saw she did the most damage. Over 454 more damage. Oh my god. And she only took 5 damage. Merceau, can you shut up? I think she's good. I like her. Smile. Despite Tremor Hemorrhage being, like, bad, this ID all around is pretty solid, and her Gaze or Contempt states work very well, and I like them a lot. She's fun, and I like her, and she's super easy to utilize. So I hope this video helped you out learn some things about her and learn how to utilize her properly. She still does work in a Tremor team, all things considered. She actually does get really supported by Night Owl's Gregor because of Deep Wound on Tremorous gain plus 1 bleed count 2 times per turn. This actually does help Corp Ryōshū sustain bleed count more when utilizing Tremor Burst. So I like it. It's very nice. It's very consistent. Obviously, if you're running a Tremor team, you want Scorch, because fucking upkeeping burn is so easy. You want that so bad. I actually made a Tremor burn team. I made a, like, fully functioning Tremor burn team. She's still on it, though, because her Tremor application's okay. It's decent, and she benefits off Tremor, so why not? She's a fun DPS that also mixes in some pseudo-tank elements, and she's cool, and I like her. Anyways, that's all. Peace.